This is London Tonight with Nina Hussain.
Good evening. A 16-year-old boy is being questioned by police tonight after a man was stabbed at the Notting Hill Carnival. It happened as the two-day event, billed as Europe's biggest street festival, was drawing to a close last night. Carnival itself passed off relatively peacefully with only slightly more arrests than last year, but that was only after record numbers of police officers were brought in from around the country just weeks after London's riots. In a moment, we'll be asking how the Met can afford the bill, but first, this report from Ronke Phillips.
This dramatic photograph captured the most serious incident to mar the carnival. A man with a knife runs down the street, the weapon still in his hand. He narrowly misses being tripped up by a heroic passerby. Behind them, a man is about to collapse after being stabbed in the abdomen. The two police officers nearby were clearly taken by surprise.
Can you all move back for us, please? Everyone move back!
Moments later, the stabbing victim collapses and paramedics rush to his aid as revellers look on, clearly in shock. The injured man, who's 20, is now in a serious but stable condition. Several people, including a 16-year-old boy, were arrested over the attack. This was by far the most violent incident over the two-day event. Despite fears, Carnival passed off relatively peacefully. There were 245 arrests, just 2 more than last year.
I think the operation was a triumph for the people of London. It was a triumph for our officers who've worked incredibly hard this last few weeks, and to get through Carnival with a serious stabbing, which is always unfortunate, but with no disorder, with crime relatively low, arrest relatively low, I think that's a success.
Both the Met and residents breathed a sigh of relief that there was no repeat of the violent scenes which were witnessed all over the capital earlier this month. Much of the success was put down to the special temporary powers to stop and search, but also the unprecedented security operation, which saw record numbers of police on the streets, some from as far away as Scotland and Wales. On Sunday, 5,500 police officers were on patrol, and yesterday there were 1,000 more, with an extra 4,000 officers drafted in over the weekend as reserves.
I think that certainly helped, but there weren't that many more, to be honest, in the footprint itself, in that relatively small area. We did, of course, have that weight of numbers around the rest of London, which surely helped. I think what really helped is, the people came to party, the police officers were there, they were there to be seen, and on this occasion, I think that, that combination gave us a nice, peaceful carnival.
The streets emptied quite quickly after the sound systems were switched off at 7 o'clock. By midnight, almost everyone had called it a night. The decision not to scrap this year's carnival appears to have paid off in one way, but it will end up costing in another. Drafting in all those officers from around the country is expected to cost millions of pounds in overtime payments. Ronke Phillips, London Tonight, New Scotland Yard.
I'm joined now by Kit Malthouse, who is, of course, the Deputy Mayor for Policing. Thanks for coming in. Look, Ronke just said there that the cost of this year's operation, it was relatively peaceful, but at what cost? The cost running into millions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Carnival is always an expensive operation. It's 1 million people coming onto the streets, and as Commander Broadhurst said, we had about the same number of police officers in the footprint this time. The difference was the reserve, which we felt we needed after the events of a couple of weeks ago, just in case. Thankfully, we didn't, but there is a cost to that, attached to that, and there will be to, in fact, all the response to the riots, because numbers have been higher ever since on a precautionary basis, and we're talking to the government about how we might be able to fund that. Fortunately, over the last 3 years we've been working hard on Met finances to make sure that the balance sheet is nice and resilient, and we've got money in reserve, so I'm confident that we can absorb, as I say, with some government assistance, most of the cost.
There's been figures banded around for the cost of the riot policing and the Carnival combined. I've seen 34 million in the past hour or so. Can you confirm that for me tonight?
That sounds about right, although obviously costs come in all the time, and you've got to add in some of the opportunity cost as well, and some of the cars and all that kind of stuff, and there's still a debate ongoing around the damage.
You seem hopeful and optimistic that the government might help, but the government hasn't got this huge pot of money to hand out to the Met, has it?
No, but I think both the government, the Mayor and the Met recognise that the primary objective is to keep the capital safe, and that if you like, the money is really secondary. We're having positive conversations with the Home Office and also, frankly, with the Mayor's office about funding for the police. But I have to say, this comes off the back of 3 years of hard work on the finances, which is allowing us to maintain police officer numbers numbers at about 32,500, drive crime down, get more cops out onto the street. And it's against that background that I think the government should hopefully be willing to help.
But the other background, of course, is not only talking about the riots and the carnival. We've had the royal wedding, we've got the Olympics coming up, we've got police cuts looming over everything. It just seems a very worrying time to be a Londoner, that at some point Londoners are going to be affected by this. Because even if you just talk about the annual leave that was cancelled for the riots period, there's going to be payback at some time.
There is, but as I say, we've been working very hard to make sure that we've got enough money to maintain police officer numbers for precisely the reasons you say, because we've both got the Olympic Games next year and we've got to keep the city safe. So keeping numbers at about 32,500, making sure those officers are as productive as possible for the same amount of money is critical to what we're doing. Boris pumped in another 42 million last year into the police budget, and that allowed us to maintain numbers. I'm having productive conversations, you won't be surprised to hear, with him about helping this year as well, and also with the government. So I'm kind of confident that combined with the savings programmes we're putting in place at the Met, we should be able to square the circle.
It all sounds very convincing. The Labour leader today has launched his campaign to stop the police cuts. A lot of Londoners are going to support that. That sounds like a sensible decision at this stage in terms of what we're going through at the moment in the capital.
Well, I think it's a little bit disingenuous, to be honest, because the police have to play their part in the national financial crisis, and they can be more efficient. Now, we've taken something like 300 million quid out of the police budget just in the first 3 years alone, and yet we've managed to put more police officers out there. So you
just
can
with the
be,
Olympics coming up, a hiatus would presumably be a good idea.
Absolutely. Within that framework, we do want to maintain numbers for that reason. We think we can do that and take money out of buildings, cars, computers, processes, all the rest of it, and be more efficient while maintaining the front line.
Okay, lots of optimism. I hope for Londoners' sake that it's bears fruit. Kit Malthouse, thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you. And we will return to the Notting Hill Carnival a little later in the programme with a massive clean-up operation that began just as the festivities ended.